On today's edition of Mock Draft Monday right here on Locked On Eagles, it is all about the offensive side of the football.
You are Locked On Eagles, your daily Philadelphia Eagles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thanks so much for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. And thanks for making the Locked On Podcast Network the #1 sports podcast network. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can bet just $5 and get $250 back in bonus bets if your first bet wins. Just head over to FanDuel.com to get started. Time now for another 7-round Philadelphia Eagles mock draft right here on the Locked On Eagles podcast. We are it's crazy, but we are less than 3 weeks away from the 2026 NFL draft. And as fun as free agency is and as impactful as it can be for the future and for the immediate future of 2026, same with the trade market, the NFL draft is really where the Philadelphia Eagles have built this championship core, the majority of it on both sides of the football. The draft is really where Howie Roseman has made his money over the last 5 to 6 years. And I think this season is going to be equally as important, specifically for the offensive side of the football. Because if you look at the last 3 draft classes, the Eagles have really focused on building up the defense with young, long-term, sustainable talent. And not just on the defensive line, but they've addressed linebacker with Jahad Campbell. They've addressed cornerback with Quinyon Mitchell and Cooper DeJean. They addressed safety with Drew Makuba. For years, it felt like on defense, they were really just signing short-term deals for veterans, a lot of Band-Aid signings. Even if they made a big-time move, it always felt like it was in free agency or the trade market. Well, again, the last 3 draft classes, they've built up the best young defense maybe in football, or at least top 3, top 5 over the last couple seasons under Vic Fangio. Because their offense was so expensive in their prime, star players everywhere, they had to go younger on defense. Well, now, because a lot of these defensive guys are up for extensions, they're getting older, ready for that second contract, naturally the roster is going to have to balance out a little bit. The offense, not saying you're going to clean house and, get rid of anybody that's a veteran on a top 10 contract at their position annually, but a lot of these guys could be gone in the next couple of years. A.J. Brown, Dallas Goedert, Lane Johnson, Tyler Steen, Landon Dickerson, Saquon Barkley. I just rattled off 6 players that could you guarantee any of those guys are Eagles after the next season or two? Who are the only players you can really guarantee on offense are going to be here after, I'd say, like 2027? I would feel pretty good about Jordan Mailata. I'd feel pretty good about Devontae Smith. Even with all the drama last week, I still feel pretty good about Jalen Hurts as well. But that's really it. Like those 3, after that, you could really make the argument that anybody else could be gone, even Cam Jurgens, who I didn't yet mention. So for the Eagles this year in the draft, I think it really should be all about offense. And so that's what I explored on today's Mock Draft Monday. I've gone offense early and often in most of these mock drafts, but today I really focused on the first three picks in the first 3 rounds are all about the offensive side of the football. And I did take a defensive player with the 98th overall pick in round 3, but those first 3 picks in the top 70, that's all about offense. And the majority of this draft class was on that side of the football. Now, I still think the Eagles need to address safety this year. It's a loaded safety class, edge rusher as well. It's a loaded edge class, but I really hope they come away with, I would say with their first 5 picks, 3 to 4 offensive players. And that's what we did on today's edition of Mock Draft Monday. With the 23rd overall pick in round 1, we went with Clemson tackle Blake Miller. And I said it on the podcast on Friday. I do believe when it comes to value, when it comes to who the best player available is going to be for the Eagles at 23, I don't think it's likely going to be an offensive lineman. I think there's a better chance it's a wide receiver. I think there's a better chance it's a safety. I think there's a better chance that it's an edge rusher. But for the Eagles, if you look at their history and most teams in the NFL, most teams do not go best player available in this black and white kind of perspective that so many draft analysts and teams and fans talk about operating like. That should not be the way teams operate, and it's not the way teams operate. Just think about it. If there is a position of need, and it's a very valuable position like offensive tackle, and you have a need there for the long term, why would you take like cornerback when you don't need that position, but the best player available is at corner, but you have three staples there already on your team? Why would you go with best player available over need? So yes, do I believe the best player available at 23 is going to be a tackle? Was Blake Miller in this mock draft, was he the best player on the board? No. But the draft, making a decision on a draft pick is not always about the best player available. That's part of it. The top guys on your board, that should be part of the equation, but so too should be positional value. So should be the depth of a class. If tackle is really thin, maybe there's a better safety on the board right now, but safety is a lot deeper. I think the combination of a tackle here and a safety in round 2 or 3 would be better than a safety here and then a tackle on day 2. That's a part of this. Long-term need, the future of your franchise is a part of it. The short-term future. All of this goes into the equation of making a draft pick decision. It's not just best player available. And I think Blake Miller is going to be close on your board to a lot of guys. Was he the number one guy on my draft board in this mock draft? No. But unless there's like a 10-spot gap where you're really reaching for a need, obviously you should not do that and take that extreme. But if it's really close, if you have, for the Eagles, for instance, like if you have a defensive tackle, Peter Woods, let's say, from Clemson as well. If Peter Woods is 2 spots higher on your board than Blake Miller, why would you go with Peter Woods when on your roster already you have Jalen Carter, you have Jordan Davis? Those are 2 long-term staples at defensive tackle. Sure, you could make the case that Peter Woods could be the long-term replacement to Moro Ujoma. And would I hate that draft pick in a vacuum? No, but would I rather have them take somebody like Blake Miller that could replace Lane Johnson long-term at one of the most important positions in football, a pillar long-term offensive tackle prospect? The Eagles have showed you how having long-term success and sustainability at tackle can really lead to some of the best contending windows the NFL has seen this century, in the 21st century. So for me, I would rather have Blake Miller than the best defensive tackle prospect on the board. Even as much as I like these safeties, I'd rather have an offensive lineman than maybe Dylan Thieneman of Oregon, maybe Emmanuel McNeil Warren from Toledo. As excited as I would be to add one of those players to the Eagles defense, I think offensive tackle, getting that long-term heir apparent to Lane Johnson, is so important. And I wouldn't take just anybody here over a safety, over a defensive tackle, over a wide receiver. Like, I'm not comfortable taking Max Ianakor from Arizona State here. I'm not comfortable taking Caden Proctor with this pick over one of those other positions. But Blake Miller, I think he moves so well. He is such a fluid athlete off the line of scrimmage with his footwork. He's got good length. I saw a lot of good power and motor in the run game. He's somebody I think the Eagles will really like because he moves to that second and third level. Like when he pulls and gets upfield, he moves really well. Blake Miller, I think, is somebody that could sit behind Lane Johnson for a year or two, learn a lot, and then be the starter opposite Jordan Mailata on that offensive line. I think Blake Miller is probably the cutoff for me at 23 for the offensive line before I start to look at trading down. If I really want to take Ianakor, Caden Proctor, I don't know if there's anybody else even really worth a first round, because I think Blake Miller is right below that top tier of Monroe Freeling, Francis Maui-Joa, Caleb Lomu. I think Spencer Fano is more of an interior offensive lineman, so I don't really include him in this conversation. I think those top 3 guys, I think it's Lomu in no order, Lomu, Maui-Joa, and Freeling. After them, I think it's tier 2. Blake Miller is right there. I think he's ahead of Ianakor. I think he is ahead of Fano, honestly. I would take him over Vega Ioane, even though Vega is the best guard in the draft. I would rather have Blake Miller's upside as a long-term tackle. And who else? Caden Proctor. The play weight, again, you guys know me if you've heard this show before. I'm nervous about that. Blake Miller, to me, is the cutoff at 23 for the offensive line. But I'm comfortable with him. Like if they see the board not falling right and there's really nobody worth trading up for, but you want to sit tight at 23 and take a player, which normally is not like Howie Roseman, but he's done it before. He did it in 2024 with Quinyon Mitchell. He did it in 2023 with Nolan Smith with that second pick he had on day one. It's not impossible for them to just sit tight. It does take two to tango. I think Blake Miller would be a really good pick there. But we are not done addressing the offensive side of the football. Mock Draft Monday continues next right here on Locked On. But first, today's episode of the Locked On Eagles podcast, we are presented by Indeed. Workplace chaos, deadlines stacking up, the inbox overflowing, and the one position you have to fill still sitting open when the pressure's on and you need the right hire. This is a job for Indeed sponsored jobs. They help you reach the people who actually fit what you're looking for: skills, experience, location. So you're not just hoping the right candidate stumbles across your post. And here's a stat that really says it all. In the minute that I've been talking to you, companies like yours made 27 hires on Indeed, according to Indeed data worldwide. So if you're hiring, spend less time searching and more time interviewing candidates who check all your boxes. Listeners of this show, you're going to get a $75 sponsored job credit to help get your job the premium status it deserves at Indeed.com/podcast. Just go to Indeed.com/podcast right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on Locked On Eagles. Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? This is a job for Indeed sponsored jobs. Thanks so much for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. And thanks for making the Locked On Podcast Network the #1 sports podcast network. Guys, if you haven't already, don't forget to check out the Locked On Eagles Everydayer Club for ad-free episodes and access to a group chat with me and other Eagles listeners. Tap the link in the show notes or head over to lockedoneagles.supercast.com to learn more. All right, let's continue Mock Draft Monday right here on Locked On Eagles. Offense heavy. That is the theme of this show. Our first three picks in the top 70 picks of the first three rounds, all about offense. We went with Blake Miller of Clemson with the 23rd overall selection. In round two, I'm going wide receiver. I'm taking Antonio Williams from the University of Clemson. We are going back-to-back Clemson Tigers with our first two picks. Antonio Williams, is he a replacement to A.J. Brown long-term? No. A.J. Brown is a do-it-all, elite #1 outside wide receiver. Antonio Williams, I compare him a lot to Ladd McConkey. I think he is a reduced split, slot-dependent receiver. And that does not mean he can't be a elite, effective part of your passing game. Antonio Williams, I think, is maybe the best separator in this class. He's in tier 1 when it comes to just creating separation at wide receiver, regardless of if it's an outside player or an inside player. His hands are so good. He is so good at finding holes in zone coverage. I talked to Daniel Jeremiah at the Combine about Antonio Williams, and he said, even if the Eagles keep A.J. Brown, they should consider taking Antonio Williams. And of course, since then they, signed Hollywood Brown, but he's only on a one-year deal. He suggested Antonio Williams being the perfect third slot receiver to complement Devontae Smith and A.J. Brown. But even if A.J. is traded, Antonio Williams, he's not going to replace that role, but he can replace a lot of those targets, a lot of the production in the receiving game. I think you look at slot receivers in the modern day NFL, they are so much more important than they used to be. And for Jalen Hurts, who's, now getting into this new West Coast system where they really want him to start throwing over the middle of the field more, quick hitters, the quick passing game, out routes, under center, play action, pre-snap motion. I feel like Antonio Williams could be a really good fit for Jalen this year as a good security blanket. And Dallas Goedert's only on a one-year deal. He's kind of been Jalen's security blanket with quick passing, throwing over the middle. When he does it, it normally is to Dallas Goedert. I think Antonio Williams can even help replace Dallas Goedert long-term. And when you think about it, ideally you want to draft a receiver in the first two rounds with inside-outside versatility, but it's not just up to you. The board might not fall that way. What if Jordan Tyson and Carnell Tate go inside the top 10? And, what if Omar Cooper Jr. goes to, I could totally see the Rams taking him inside the top 15. What if none of those guys are available at 23? Mekhi Lemon, even if those top 4 prospects don't fall within that 23rd overall pick range or trade up range, I don't know. I mean, yeah, round 2, you could go with a Chris Bell. You could go with a Ted Hurst. But, I don't think necessarily the Eagles have to go with that A.J. Brown replacement in the draft. Maybe they want to explore the 2027 draft to do that. Maybe they want to get through a year where they know they have Devontae Smith as a true elite number 1. And so they don't feel the pressure as much to replace AJ. They can just take a productive receiver, the most productive guy, which could be Antonio Williams, and they can address the other outside spot next year after Hollywood Brown's contract is up, or maybe they do it through the trade market. Maybe they re-explore the Brian Thomas trade front or Marvin Harrison. Maybe there's a player we don't think of right now that could be available on the open market at some point this season. I'm just saying, I think there's a good chance that if the Eagles take a receiver in the first 2 rounds, it should be a guy that can play on the outside. But Antonio Williams, like if you're just looking for a long-term number 2 or 3 to Devontae Smith, that's the thing is like the Eagles don't necessarily, ideally you want 2 complete do-it-all receivers like you've had with AJ and Devontae and to keep that luxury going. But maybe you want to build this receiving core in more of a complementary way where you have Smitty as your true alpha number 1. You have Hollywood Brown as a really good deep threat. Maybe now you want to go with like this elite separator in the slot, and that could be Antonio Williams. So I think this is an idea that we haven't really explored yet on this show. And if you're talking about just getting the most productive player at the position that can help you from day 1, that maybe isn't going to replace AJ Brown's role, but he could replace his stats. Like he can just replace receptions in yards, in touchdowns. I think Antonio Williams is going to be a much more productive day 1 player than Chris Bell, than Ted Hurst, than Chris Brazel. And I would rather probably take those guys in a vacuum over Antonio Williams, but I thought this was an interesting idea to explore on today's Mock Draft Monday. And I think Antonio Williams should not be off your draft board for the Eagles, whether AJ Brown is on this team or not. Devontae Smith, having Devontae gives you the flexibility to still have this as an option. If AJ Brown was their true alpha number 1 and they didn't have another guy like Devontae Smith, then no, I'm not taking Antonio Williams. I'm going with the projection of a Ted Hurst or a Chris Bell or maybe even Denzel Boston. And I don't love Denzel Boston, but I need that guy. The Eagles have that guy. I'd like another one if they lose AJ, but Antonio Williams, like look at the modern day NFL. Slot receivers are so important for the modern day offense, considering the way defenses are adjusting to other things that your passing attack does. So we went with 2 Clemson players, our first 2 rounds, Blake Miller at 23 and Antonio Williams at pick 54. And my first 3rd round pick at 68 is not going to surprise a lot of you. If you've been listening to this show over the last couple months, he's becoming that guy. Every year there's one player that it feels like every Mock Draft Monday, he's in that class. I feel like that's happened all the time. It happened with me and Gino, with like Charles Omenihu and Alton Robinson and Devontae Smith at one point, receivers, corners. Quinyon Mitchell was that guy a couple years ago. This year for day 2, it's Georgia tight end Oscar Delp. I will not get off this hill. Like he is, I'm stamping my guy flag in the ground of this mountain. Like I am standing on the table. I'm pounding the table for Georgia tight end Oscar Delp to be the Eagles pick on day 2 if they select a tight end. I like Max Clare a lot. I do. I think he has a really complete skill set that I'd be very comfortable adding to the Eagles tight end room. Eli Stowers, his size, his vertical, he is a really exciting player. But I will say time and time again, Oscar Delp is the most complete day 2 prospect. He's the best bang for your buck when it comes to a floor of blocking and a ceiling of receiving. Is he, more of a receiving projection than Max Clare, Eli Stowers? Yeah, based on lack of production at college. But I see it on tape that he can be that guy. I get some Dallas Goedert, poor man George Kittle vibes, and the blocking reps are really important. And that's what the Eagles are looking for at tight end this year. So Oscar Delp to me is a player that I am pounding the table for. I really hope the Eagles can come away with this draft class, getting him in the building at tight end with Dallas Goedert, Johnny Munt, and Grant Calcaterra. All right, we'll wrap up Mock Draft Monday. Coming up next, right here on the Locked On Eagles podcast, finishing things off with one more pick in round 3 at 98, and then we'll go day 3, rounds 4 through 7. Today's episode of the Locked On Eagles podcast is presented by FanDuel. FanDuel is keeping us busy in a very busy month of April for sports, college basketball, the NBA playoffs, the NHL, and the NBA playoffs to me are the most exciting one. The NBA playoffs are here, and every possession matters. Every matchup is magnified. Every game can swing a series in basketball. And right now, FanDuel is giving new customers a great way to get in on the action. You can bet just $5 and get, this is crazy, $250 back in bonus bets if your first bet wins. The app makes it easy to follow the action with player stats, trends, and matchups all in one place. And during the playoffs, that extra insight really matters when you're looking at stars, role players, and key moments. It just makes the entire playoff experience more engaging from start to finish. Head to FanDuel.com to get started. FanDuel, play your game. All right, wrapping up Mock Draft Monday right here on the Locked On Eagles podcast. It's crazy, but this is actually our third last Mock Draft Monday. We are less than 3 weeks away from the 2026 NFL draft. And so we are going to be busy with draft content, but it's crazy. We have really explored so many different scenarios with Mock Draft Monday, with trade ups, trade downs, double dipping at certain positions. Like, what if you went with this combination of positions first or this? Defense heavy. Today's been all about offense. We took Blake Miller at 23, the Clemson tackle at 54 in round 2. We went with another Clemson player, Antonio Williams at wide receiver. Tight end from Georgia, Oscar Delp, my guy, picked at 68 in round 3. Now we can focus a little bit more on defense with our 98th pick in the 3rd round and then our picks in round 4 through 7. So let's go defense here at 98. I'm going to take a guy that I think really we don't talk about a lot at edge rusher, but he fits exactly what normally Vic Fangio looks for in an edge rusher. He's a guy that can stand up, drop back in coverage. He's explosive. He's got really good bend. He can get to the quarterback. Is he the biggest guy in the world? Like, is he as big as his Auburn teammate Keldrick Falk? No, but Keyron Crawford, I should say. I'm thinking of Kerryon Johnson, the former Auburn running back, but Auburn edge rusher Keyron Crawford. He's a guy that I think could be a very similar pick to what you did in 2024 with Jalix Hunt, where maybe he's a little bit more raw, but the athleticism, the upside, the physical profile, the speed, the bend, the versatility to drop back, it's all there. And maybe he doesn't come and run it right away and be a top 2 guy in your edge rotation, but the Eagles might not necessarily need that. They've got Nolan Smith. They've got Jalix Hunt. They've got Arnold Ebiketie. Keyron Crawford, I love the idea of putting him in round 3, 98th overall. He just fits that skill set that Nolan Smith has, that, Jalix Hunt has, Arnold Ebiketie. I think the Eagles have a type right now at edge. And I would love to bring in like his teammate Keldrick Falk and get that big 6'5", 250 plus defensive end, hand in the dirt kind of player in this rotation. But I think this is the kind of guy the Eagles like. And Keyron Crawford, really impressive, the Senior Bowl. His tape, like, he is a bendy, explosive guy off the line of scrimmage. And I think the Eagles would like him a lot. So I think he's not a number 1 guy from day one. Like, this is a 3rd round pick for a reason at 98, more of a projection pick. But if you're looking for, again, that fastball off the edge to rotate in as that 3 or 4 guy behind Nolan and Jalix to complement Arnold Ebiketie and Brandon Graham, Keyron Crawford, I think, would be a really good addition to that edge room. And then round 4, I traded up actually to pick 107 from 114 to make sure I get one of those starting caliber safeties in a really deep class. And Zakee Wheatley from Penn State, I feel like he's the cutoff for me. Whereas after Wheatley, and I would say Bud Clark is a part of this as well at TCU, after those 2 guys, once you get past them, I feel like there's like 5 to 7 safeties. I'm like, they could start for the Eagles day 1, even ahead of Marcus Epps. I feel like Wheatley is that last guy. So he was the last player available on the board for that group that I'm comfortable with. So I traded up 7 spots, gave away a 7th round pick in the 190s, moved up from 114 to 107 to get Zakee Wheatley. And yeah, maybe safety you're going to be going a little bit lighter, almost like a couple cornerbacks back there behind Mitchell, DeJean, and Woolen with Makuba and Wheatley. But the ball skills, the combination of those two with ball skills, Wheatley and Makuba, really, really impressive. Like, these are guys that can get interceptions. Zakee Wheatley is a former cornerback. He really knows how to take, good passing angles on passes to jump the ball, good hands. He can finish plays. Zakee Wheatley, I feel like, is a very underrated safety in this class. And I actually think, I talked to him at the combine. He got a lot more comfortable as the years went on with Penn State when it comes to being an in the box, get your nose dirty against the run kind of tackler. I actually think that he got a lot better in that area as the years went on. So I kind of like the idea of putting a couple ball hawks behind 3 shutdown corners that their interception totals are lower because guys don't really throw them the football. They'll throw at them, right? Quinyon Mitchell and Cooper DeJean and Reek Woolen had a 6 interception season, and they're going to throw at him. But I like the idea of maybe having a couple ball hawks back at safety when you're playing too deep. And Wheatley and Makuba, they can cover a lot of ground together. I think that's an exciting pair. Normally, I like to go with a bigger do-it-all safety like a McNeil Warren or a Jalen Kilgore or a Bud Clark. But again, this is maybe more about like what Vic Fangio wants than what I want. And I think Keyron Crawford from Auburn and Zakee Wheatley from safety, I think they both kind of fit the mold of, at least from what we've seen in Philadelphia, of what Fangio has liked at edge rusher and at safety. I think these guys compare a lot to Nolan Smith, to Jalix Hunt, and to Drew Makuba. And then let's round things out in rounds 4 through 7. Zakee Wheatley, of course, our pick in round 4 at 107. I went with another receiver to complement Antonio Williams at pick 137 in round 4. Notre Dame's Malachi Fields. And look, the guy ran a 4.61, not a super explosive receiver, but we took a slot receiver early on in this draft. Maybe you want to add some size now. Maybe it's a shot in the dark, dartboard throw at a bigger contested catch guy to replace A.J. Brown long-term. Malachi Fields, again, is he going to really separate tremendously at the next level? I don't know, but I think this is a good shot. This is, could he be J.J. Arcega-Whiteside 2.0 or Keon Coleman? Sure, but could he be a new Alshon Jeffrey? Or, could he be a poor man's version of, Drake London or Mike Evans? Like, maybe. I could see that. Malachi Fields, he is a guy that can go above the rim. Really strong hands at the catch point. I actually thought for a guy that size, and I saw the 4.61 40-yard dash, and before I did this mock draft, I thought about him, and I wanted to see if he plays faster on film than that 4.61 shows. And I think he does. I'm not comfortable taking him in the first 2 rounds to be like a long-term guaranteed starter for my offense, but 4th round, 137, dart throw at the board, especially when I took an undersized slot receiver in Antonio Williams in the 2nd round, I don't hate this. I think round 4 is really good value for Malachi Fields. Big catch radius, physical at the line. I trust him to play on the outside against press man coverage. He can win. He can be a red zone weapon. Again, the separation ability, the speed after the catch, that's something that I'm not sure at the next level what he can be. But with Johnny Wilson and Malachi Fields now in the building, you've got some size there to replace AJ. Neither one's going to replace his production, but that's why we drafted Antonio Williams. That's why we have Hollywood Brown. That's why we have Devontae Smith. That's why we would likely in this scenario, if I'm the Eagles, explore a trade for a Brian Thomas or a Marvin Harrison. But I just like that combination of, okay, if I go slot receiver early, a productive player in Antonio Williams, maybe I'll now go for that size in the 4th round. Malachi Fields, really intriguing player from Notre Dame. And then to round things out in rounds 5 and 6, I went with, at pick 153, South Louisiana defensive tackle Caleb Proctor, 4.5 sacks last year. Long, explosive player. If you're going to try to replace Moro Ujoma, but it's later on in this draft, maybe you add some competition for, Gabe, why am I blanking on his name? Byron Young, excuse me. And I'm thinking of Gabe Hall, who the Eagles do not have anymore, defensive tackle. Maybe it's Byron Young, maybe it's Ty Robinson, but you add some competition there behind your top 3 defensive tackles. And there's not a lot of interior pass rushers with upside in this class, but I think Proctor is one of those guys. He had 4.5 sacks last year. And then our final pick in round 7, we took Carson Beck from Miami. I just think the Eagles are going to want to add a quarterback prospect, and no, it has nothing to do with Jalen Hurts, but Tanner McKee has 1 year left on his contract. They traded for a 39-year-old Andy Dalton. I think they want to look for a long-term backup quarterback with some, legitimate starting upside, because even if he doesn't become the starter in Philadelphia, eventually, like Tanner McKee, you have this optionality of trading him for a draft pick down the road. The Eagles historically have been very good at getting draft capital for backups like AJ Feely and Kevin Cobb and Sam Bradford, Kenny Pickett even. So they've traded a lot of these guys away and they've got compensation back. And I think Carson Beck is another guy that, low floor, but kind of a high ceiling. And he showed some growth going from Georgia to Miami, a bigger player with a big arm, solid mobility, has some upside. And I think the Eagles, like, again, these dart throws at times at quarterback, this year is the time to do that again with Tanner McKee having 1 year left on his contract. Let me know what you thought of that mock draft. Hit us up on X at Locked On Birds or our YouTube community page as well. Until our bonus show later on today, thanks so much for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. Thanks so much for downloading, watching, and listening, and let's go Birds. Fly, Eagles, fly.